section, and I'll go ahead and address it. All right, we are live. All right, my name is Chris Bear with Castle Wealth Group. We do these weekly wisdom webinars every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And really, it's an unscripted opportunity to answer any questions that people submit either ahead of time or they submit on the actual call. So if there's anything kind of floating around in your head that you have questions on from a legal, financial, tax perspective, just please put it in the Q&A and we'll go ahead and we'll address it. Otherwise, we address the questions that were submitted ahead of time or any kind of burning topics floating around out there. And we always like to start with a positive focus, something positive that happened, either personally or professionally. Personally, I'm super excited. My son, we have a band concert tonight. So he's part of what's called the Eagle Band, which is for the sixth graders who are really excelling at bands. And it's kind of like their kind of select band. And then he has his normal band concert with the rest of his group. So we actually get two band recitals out of my son tonight. So I'm pretty excited for that. He plays clarinet and then also he does piano lessons. So he's pretty musical. He doesn't get it from me. I think he gets it from his grandfather who plays piano. And then professionally, it was super exciting to actually present at the Livonia, Michigan Senior Expo today. So it's our first expo we've done in almost about 2 years since prior to the pandemic. So there's good turnout. I think there was 30 different vendors at the expo. I'm not sure how many people, seniors and retirees showed up. There's doctors and attorneys and advisors and assisted living communities. And so just a lot of resources available. And then this morning at 10, I was able to present in front of a crowd, which we haven't done in quite a long time. So it's good to get out there and provide that education. We talked about 3 steps to planning for the second half of life. And if we've done a webinar on the topic, so if you do want that, just feel free to shoot us an email and we'll send you a copy of that webinar. But it was good to get out in front of people and answer questions and kind of felt like old times. So that was pretty cool. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, if you do have questions, legal, financial, tax questions, whatever it may be, now's your time to put it in the Q&A because actually this week I only have one question that was submitted ahead of time. So if you do have something that's floating around in your head, no matter how silly you think it may be, feel free to put it in the Q&A and I'll go ahead and address it because this really is just time for you. It's kind of like open office hours. So whatever questions you have for a certified law attorney and certified financial planner, now's your time to ask those questions. And give me a second as I hit a couple buttons before I share my screen. This button, this button, this button, and we should be good. All right, yeah. So this is general information. If you want to see how it applies to your specific situation, please schedule some time on our calendar. So the one question that I had submitted ahead of time, and again, if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A for me so I can address it. Otherwise, it'll be a pretty quick call and I'll grab some lunch. So here's the question. So financial power of attorney appears to be immediate or springing, or appears to be you're able to make it either immediate or springing. It's hard. English is hard sometimes. Versus the medical power of attorney, which seems to be only springing. Is there a situation when a medical power of attorney can be immediate? So here's the thing. So first, we have 2 different types of powers of attorney. We have a financial power of attorney and a medical power of attorney. The financial power of attorney, we can do it either immediate, which typically we do, or we can do it springing, and we'll talk about the difference. Versus the medical power of attorney, seems to be only springing. All right, so let's first take one step back and talk about what these documents are. So when we're talking about a comprehensive estate plan, think of an estate plan as it's your rule book versus relying on the government's rule book. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about a rule book for while you're living. And then, God forbid, you were to pass away. So while you're living, your rule book is what we call disability documents. And your disability documents are your financial power of attorney and your medical power of attorney. So a document appoints someone to make financial decisions if you were to get a knock on your head, and someone to make medical decisions if you're unable to make your own medical decisions. And then upon death, this is typically where we're looking at things like trusts and wills. Those are kind of the rules upon death. And understand that if you haven't created your own rule book, then you're going to probate. And probate while you're alive would be things like guardianships, where if you haven't created a financial and medical power of attorney, as well as conservatorships. If you have money, then they're going to appoint someone to manage your money for you. So to avoid this is why we have things like financial and medical powers of attorney. If you have those in place, then you can avoid the guardianships and conservatorships, right? So there's two types of financial power of attorney. There's what's called a springing financial power of attorney. And springing means you sign it, but it's not effective immediately. It springs into effect. And typically we have like 2 licensed physicians signing off to say that you're incapacitated. Then the financial power of attorney would be would spring into effect once 2 licensed physicians sign off to say you're incapacitated. I'm not a big fan of the springing financial power of attorney because you have to get 2 licensed physicians to sign off before the document will work. And sometimes that could be like wrangling squirrels. It could be tough. It's like another hurdle before your family would be able to step in and manage your finances. And also another reason why I don't like the springing financial power of attorney is that, especially with married couples, typically you're appointing your spouse. And so if you're traveling or something and you need something done with the immediate financial power of attorney, your spouse can actually get things done for you. Or let's say you're widowed at this point and you're just getting up there in age and you still have capacity, you're not incapacitated, but maybe now you want one of your kids, your son or daughter, to help you just kind of pay your bills and that type of thing. We don't have to drag you to courts or drag 2 licensed physicians to say you're incapacitated. They can just do that for you. So yeah, so typically what we're doing is we're doing an immediate financial power of attorney. Where typically you're appointing your spouse first, and then if not your spouse, your kids, versus I'm not a big fan of the springing financial power of attorney. So with the financial power of attorney, you do have the flexibility to be able to choose. Now, I guess not unfortunately, but just the way the laws work, the medical power of attorney, so that medical power of attorney who's making medical decisions has to be springing. And the reason for that is it's just by statute. So the statute in Michigan and most states says that the only way a medical power of attorney will be effective is only if it has to be springing, meaning you can, first of all, you always make your own medical decisions. But if you're incapacitated in your coma, that's when the medical power of attorney kicks in. So unfortunately, there is not a situation where the medical power of attorney can be immediate. And the reason for that is statute. The Michigan statutes and most states statutes say that the medical power of attorney has to be basically a springing, that always you're going to make your own medical decisions. And then only if you're clearly incapacitated, 2 licensed physicians signing off to say you're incapacitated, only then would the medical power of attorney kick in. So medical power of attorney by statute has to be springing, meaning you're in full control while you're alive and well. Only you can make decisions. You can't delegate that. But then if you're incapacitated in your coma, that's when the medical power of attorney kicks in. Financial power of attorney can be immediate or springing. But I'll tell you, just in my experience and doing this for 16 years, we much prefer it to be immediate for most people. So financial power of attorney, it's immediate. Springing power of attorney or medical power of attorney, it's typically, or by statute, it has to be springing. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, so a couple questions came in here. Number 2. Okay, I have a Castle Trust with us. Recently bought treasury bonds for 10,000 and plan to do more. How do I fund the trust? Okay, so here's a situation. Client set up a trust, opened up some new accounts, specifically treasury bonds. How do I get them into the trust? So this is something that's important to understand is whenever you create any type of trust, whether it's a revocable trust or a castle trust, if you do open up new accounts, you always need to make sure that the trust is funded, meaning that, okay, let's say we have a married couple here. We need to make sure that your assets get funded into the trust, either through ownership or beneficiary designations. If you open up treasury bonds, especially like the I bonds, which is a great opportunity right now with all the inflation that we're having. I think I bonds for the next 6 months are offering about a 9% rate of return, but the max you can put into it is 10,000 or 15,000, depending on your tax returns. But you can do it for, let's say you're a married couple, you can do 10,000 for a husband, 10,000 for the wife. And then if you have a trust, you could do 10,000 for the trust. So it's just how you register each one. So theoretically, if you're a married couple and you have a trust, you could do $30,000 worth of I bonds right now, which are earning a 9% rate of return for 6 months, which is pretty darn ridiculous, guaranteed. But the key is that whenever you open up any type of new account, you need to either make sure that the beneficiary, so you would go to treasury.gov and just change the beneficiary, would point to the trust, or you would change ownership to the trust. In which case you would just reissue the bonds in the name of the trust. But not only bonds, but any type of financial account, whether it's a checking account, savings account, real estate, if you do have a trust, one of the biggest mistakes we see people make is they don't continue to fund the trust. Whether we set up the trust or some other firm sets up the trust, understand that that's not like you check the box and you're done with your estate planning. You need to make sure the trust is funded correctly. If you buy a cottage up north, you need to make sure that that's pointing to the trust, either directly through a deed, deeding it to the trust, or doing what's called a ladybird deed that says it's in your name while you're alive, and then upon death goes to the trust. So if you do have a trust, it's important to understand that every asset, every account you have should either be owned by the trust or name the trust as a primary contingent beneficiary. So everything should flow into the trust because this is your rule book. This is what avoids probate. This is what controls the distribution. So too often we see people that did a trust 10 years ago with another firm, they haven't kept it funded correctly. And now, God forbid they pass away, some of the assets might end up going into probate, even though they have a trust. So that's one of the key things to keep in mind. And that's why we have programs where we're sitting down with our clients on an annual basis to review their changes in family situation, review changes in law, and then just review, like, have you opened up any new accounts? Have you opened up new life insurance? Did you transfer money from one financial firm to another? Have you named beneficiaries on those different accounts? Did you purchase I bonds with now all the race to get as many I bonds as possible? Are those pointing to the trust one way or another? So go to treasury.gov, at least change the beneficiary, or you can have them reissued in the name of the trust. Or give us a call and we can help you with it. All right. Still working. All right. So here, question number 3. All right. Obama. All right. So it's talking about the 3.8% surtax on 401k, IRA rollovers. Okay. So let me, where's my, do I have, yeah. All right. So one of the things we have is our key data sheet for 2022. And what we talk about, it has all the key ingredients here. And so all the key numbers, because they change every year. So one of the things that we've talked about, big picture, and in fact, we just did a whole workshop on this. And then I have a webinar that talks about tax planning. And if you want a copy of that, just email us and put in tax webinar and we can send it out to you. But we talk about kind of this concept in great detail. But one of the things that everyone, and don't just take my word for it, but just you can Google like Roth conversions 2020. Like, should I be doing them? Like, everyone should be exploring this idea of pulling money from these tax deferred accounts. Okay, so we have these different tax buckets. We have non-qualified, which is checking, savings, brokerage. We have tax deferred like 401ks, IRAs. And then we have tax-free bucket of money, which is like Roth, cash value life insurance, 529s, health savings accounts. Okay. And here's the thing. We have this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that runs from 2018 to 2025. And what it's saying is that in 2026 and beyond, taxes are going up across the board 3 to 4%. Okay? Could be higher. Plus, we're $30 trillion in debt, and that's going up every day. Okay, so most people think taxes are going up. So if that's the case, understand that if taxes go up, the value of these accounts are going down. So that's why a lot of people are looking at tax saving strategies. And I think there's really, and I talk about this in the webinar, and if you haven't seen it or you want a copy, just send me an email and we'll send you a copy. You can watch a recording of it. But we think there's really kind of 5 core tax strategies right now. And the first one is Roth conversions. So moving money out of this tax deferred account, moving it over into Roth and paying the tax now. Second would be IUL conversions, moving it to life insurance, a little more complicated, but similar concept. Then qualified charitable distributions. So if you're over 70 and a half or 72 and you're donating to charities, there's better ways to handle it, utilizing your IRA money. There's also what's called donor advised funds, where if you're donating to churches and charities with post-tax dollars, maybe it makes sense to lump them together. And then there's even some like legal kind of trust strategies, like charitable remainder trusts. So we have, like, given that we know taxes are going up, there's certain kind of strategies that we can utilize. And one of the biggest ones, just to understand, is that, look, your 22% tax bracket right now, which is basically 80,000 for a married couple to 178, this is going to 25%. So what that means, if you pull money out of your account now at 22%, versus if you were to wait until 2026, you're going to have to pay 25% tax on your IRA. So that's looking at it big picture. But there's a couple other little things to take into account. And sometimes people get hung up on the details and they worry too much about Medicare, this Medicare or the Obamacare surtax. And they're not necessarily looking at the whole picture. They're letting kind of the tail wag the dog, so to speak. But yeah, like if we get to a certain amounts, what are the downsides of doing this? So the downsides are, when you do this, your Medicare premiums will go up, but then they'll drop back down. Okay. So if you are paying for Medicare, understand that if you were to do a Roth conversion, you are going to pay higher Medicare premiums for a year, but then it's going to drop back down. And then also, if we get above, for married filing jointly, tax bracket, then we're going to have a potential surtax of 3.8% on investment income as well. But I'm going to tell you that your tax savings is going to far outweigh your Medicare premiums, and it's going to far outweigh your like any additional like surtax. Let me just share one of the screens from the presentation that we did. So give me just a second. Here, give me let me pull this up real quick. And again, if you want to see this, we can send it to you. But this is an example of hypothetical clients. Hold on, let me just share my screen. And they had $1.5 million pre-tax dollars. And just by getting up to the 24% tax bracket, for the rest, maxing out their 24% tax bracket every year, we're adding about $1.6 million to their overall. Let me see if I can make this full screen. So in this situation, this was, we'll call it a hypothetical client. But if you look at the green bucket versus the blue on this graph, the blue is them continuing to defer paying taxes. Okay, so you get your Social Security pension, then you start taking out your RMDs, and that's kind of deferring paying taxes. Versus this green graph here, whoops, this green graph here, this is them maxing out the 24% tax bracket and looking at doing things like Roth conversions or IUL conversions. By doing this, they're putting about $1.6 million more into their portfolio and what they leave to their kids versus continuing to defer paying taxes. So yeah, do you think adding $1.6 million to a portfolio on a $1.5 million IRA, does that outweigh paying some additional Medicare premiums for 4 years or 5 years or the surcharge? Most likely, yes. Or again, similarly, like if we have a $1.5 million IRA, you can continue to defer paying taxes and then pay taxes on the reinvested RMDs, and then your kids pay taxes. You're looking at paying like $775,000 worth of taxes on that $1.5 million IRA versus, and I'm not saying you do this, but you convert it all to Roth in 1 year, you might pay roughly $200,000 in taxes. So yeah, taxes are one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities right now. And yeah, you can get hung up on, oh, I'm going to pay more Medicare premiums, or what about this surcharge? But I can almost, like, everyone's situation is a little bit different, but I'm going to tell you that when you actually run all of the numbers, you're looking at it holistically, not just like, oh, I don't want to pay more of a Medicare premium. But if you look at the overall like net effect on the portfolio, chances are you're going to come out ahead by just understanding the current tax code. We're at one of the lowest historical marginal tax brackets in history. And just the way the tax code is written now, taxes are scheduled to go up, let alone the fact that we're $30 trillion in debt, and taxes could go up much higher in the future. So yeah, so I would still suggest that, yeah, even if you pay the Obama surtax of 3.8%, or yeah, if you pay more in Medicare premiums, your tax savings over the rest of your retirement, and especially what you leave to as a legacy, given the Secure Act that says that if you're leaving pre-tax dollars to the next generation, they're going to hammer them and they have to pay all the taxes within 10 years. I'm going to suggest that it makes much more sense in almost every situation to pay a little more tax now versus paying a lot of tax over the rest of your retirement. And again, like, we're at one of the lowest historical marginal tax rates ever in history. Let me just pull up. This is from my presentation too. A lot of people just assume that we've always been at this relatively low tax rate. And that's just not the case. It's been as high as like 94% or 60, 70%. Like, we haven't always been at this low marginal tax rate. Like, if you look back historically at marginal tax rates, right now, the max marginal tax rate is 37%. It's been, prior to the 80s, we've been at 70%, 91%. When Ronald Reagan was president, 94%. And again, we're $30 trillion in debt now as a country. We've almost doubled in the last 10 years, and we've added $8 trillion just within the pandemic. So is the government going to cut spending? Most likely not, especially as we're giving $50 billion to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Are they going to print more money? Well, we're already dealing with inflation issues right now. So most people say they're going to have to raise taxes. So if you have pre-tax accounts like IRAs, 401ks, like, I suggest developing an IRA exit strategy or 401k exit strategy, because taxes aren't going to go down. They're either going to remain the same, which they're actually scheduled not to. They're scheduled, like, legally right now, they're scheduled to go up. So I'd rather pay a 22 or 24% tax now than a 25 or 28% tax in the future. And again, I think this is one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities. And unfortunately, we've been kind of wired in our head to defer paying taxes as long as possible with this assumption that we're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement. A lot of times we're in the same tax bracket, just on the lower end of that same 22% tax bracket. So, okay. So hopefully that was helpful. That was all the questions that I have submitted. So with that, thank you, everyone. Make it a great week. Take care.